gender-based violence is very much a tool that is used to repress worker rights, to silence workers, and to isolate workers so that they can't stand up for themselves, challenge their employers, and defend their rights at work. Now, by hosting this panel today, we're not saying that all you have to do is organize your workplace and you'll have solved the problem of gender-based violence. As a panel full of organizers, we know to begin with that organizing a workplace is very hard work. But even after you're organized, you have to create the space, very deliberately and intentionally, for women's leadership, for women's solidarity, and for prioritizing gender-based violence as an issue within the union. We recognize, even as trade unionists, that a lot of our organizations are patriarchal structures in their origin, and it's up to us as organizers and leaders to challenge that, challenge the structures, and make space for this issue. So this panel is going to discuss how their organizations are doing that, the role that organizing plays in not just confronting gender-based violence in the workplace, but really building worker power to change the situation for livelihoods, safety and health at work, and empowerment in people's broader lives. So let me now introduce our panel. To my left is Runge, who's the author of a new study that you would have gotten on your way in the building. If you don't, we've got them in the back, called Ending Gender-Based Violence in the World of Work in the United States. We've asked Robin to speak. Although this study looks at the US, a lot of the lessons and a lot of the data that she's found you'll recognize from your own countries. It's very similar. So she's going to provide a frame for our other panelists. Then we'll hear from Kazi Fouzia, who's the Director of Organizing for Runge, Desis Rising Up and Moving. And that's a worker organization here in New York City that works with low-income, working-class immigrant workers across sectors, mostly from South Asia. Then finally we have Julia Rybak, who is the Director of Organizing for the New York Hotel Trades Council, which is a very strong union here in New York, represents workers in the hotels and hospitality sectors, to talk about her union's experience in confronting gender-based violence. And finally, to my right, we have Ernestina Ochoa, who's the Vice President of the International Domestic Workers Federation, and the Secretary of Women and Gender for the Domestic Workers Federation of Peru. We'll talk about the specific situation confronting women who are domestic workers. And Jill Schenker has generously agreed to translate for her this afternoon. So with that, I will stop speaking, and let me turn it over to Robin to give us a little bit of an overview of gender-based violence in the world of work.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon. The day before the storm, right? So it's an honor and a privilege for me just to say a few words before I pass it to my sisters to speak about their wonderful work organizing workers. I am currently a part-time law professor at the University of at George Washington University. I was once a law professor at the University of North Dakota School of Law. I've been working with victims of domestic and sexual violence for 25 years. I actually started my work when I was 2 or 3 years old. No, I'm kidding. Right out of college. And it was actually my work with victims of domestic and sexual violence that led me to go to law school and become an employment and workers' rights attorney. I had been assisting women in courts and in battered women's shelters here in the States. And again had women share with me their struggles to maintain an income and maintain their safety. And too often, the women I served were struggling between those two places and choosing not to seek assistance because they were afraid that they would lose their job if they took time off from work to get a protection order or to seek housing or safety for their families and their children. And I just thought that was wrong, period. And so I went to law school and discovered very quickly as a baby lawyer that in the United States at the time, it was actually perfectly legal to fire someone because they were a victim of domestic or sexual violence, whether that violence took place at work or at home. And so for the last 20 years, I've had the privilege of representing individual victims of domestic and sexual violence. I've also helped pass a number of laws here in the United States that prohibit discrimination based on your status as a victim. New York State has one of those laws, as does New York City. And so I'm proud to be a part of this discussion. The report that we released today describes those laws and also describes what you'll hear from my colleagues. We know there are extraordinarily high rates of gender-based violence against women in the workplace. And the report defines that to include expressly sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, coercion, on the way to work, while you're at work, when you go to your transportation to get home, and also recognizes the impact that violence away from the workplace has on the victim's ability to do her job and the responsibilities that employers have to address that and not punish those victims for their status as victims. The report does a great job of pulling together data that we do have here in the United States in different sectors that show extremely high rates of violence against women. In the restaurant industry, in the seafood industry, domestic workers. In these industries where we see these are often female-dominated workplaces with contingent workforces, with individuals who are undocumented. All of these factors and parts of their lives create vulnerabilities that we know are connected to higher rates of violence. Including farm workers. So we know some studies in the United States indicate that migrant farm workers experience over 50% of women farm workers have experienced rape. And we know that over 50% in many studies of restaurant workers who are women have experienced sexual assault and sexual harassment. The report, I will also say, but I won't give those details, also describes the costs of this violence to not just those individuals, clearly, but to those workplaces, to their coworkers, right? To us as customers in our communities and our societies, and why we need to create better legal and organizing tools so that we can stop gender-based violence in our workplaces here in the United States and around the country. So with that, I'll turn it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Before I start talking about the organization and our works, I want to just little bit talk about me. When I came this country, age of 40, as an undocumented immigrant with the Muslim identity, brown color, and as undocumented immigrant find out the jobs, I just target the South Asian, Desi, ownership type business, and I found job as a retail worker, as a seamstress in Jackson High. So when I joined the shops, I realized it's not only the undocumented or documented immigrant issue, it's not only the issue people are not getting minimum wage or long-time works. It's a lot of workplace unjust environment and even violence, sexual harassment. People are not ready to talk, discriminate, like as a woman, even the ways, the man getting more ways and women not getting same ways, but they are doing more work. Nobody wants to even talk. It's not the issue. They are undocumented, they are not going to find out the job. Even the immigrant people also scared to talk because language is the big obstacle to get another job and find out the job, even they have work permit or social security. So I was really, I felt that time really helpless and burned. How can I work with this issue? How can I help myself and also other people? That time actually I found drum and I joined as a drum member. And probably after 1 year, I know documented or undocumented people have same right to get minimum wage, same right to get everything, whatever the immigrant can get. So this is something make me happy, and I was more committed to work with drum, and I joined as a worker organizer, definitely volunteer at that time because I was undocumented. Now I'm documented, but when I joined like as a worker organizer, part-time job that time, I realized people speak more because they think I'm also like them, I'm also retail worker, and they speak out. And we think It's a lot of story. It's not only the West, it's not only the long-timers, it's a lot of harassment and sexual harassment and retaliation. So what can we do? So we decided to survey each other. We surveyed 200 worker, retail, restaurant, domestic worker, construction, and taxi worker, 5 sector-wise. And we think, and now what we'll do with this data? We are not like advocacy or policy type group, a grassroots organizing group. But we need to use this data. And Urban Justice Center, CDP, actually helped us to make a report. And 2012, we are ready to launch our report. We are so happy after a long time. We have something in our hand. We have people's story, we have data, we have our report. And we decide our one worker leader can speak up the event. And we invite Labor Department, federal and local, White House people, journalists, and finally the day the report launched, workers say, I cannot do this because boss threatened me to fire me. So I'm not going to speak. And my old executive director, Munami Moli, said, okay, Kazi, you can speak then, because you also retail workers same. And I speak up, and we finally, I have some fact sheet, we finally release our report. But when I become a community organizer, I engage more with my community. I have a full-time job. I can constant full-time organizing, and I start work with immigrations, police accountability, worker organizing. That time I'm getting more domestic violence call. All over the community just start calling. Every single day I get 2, 3, 4 calls. Women's looking for help. They have unjust incidents in their workplace, manager or bosses, harassment, and the home, the husband or the boyfriend harassment. And I start to build the relation with DB organization, and I start to send people every single day, different organization. Sometimes really crazy condition, but I cannot suggest the police, because this is the same NYPD actually target us as a Muslim, target our masjid, target our neighborhood, target our youth, stop our youth 60 times in the street. So I cannot suggest the NYPD. Even the undocumented wife called the NYPD or 911, husband will be deported. They cannot manage their bread and butter because they are undocumented. Social support not going to help them as much as how they support the citizen. So that's the reason we have to send all people either counseling, either sister support system, even the domestic violence people more actually take initiative to go counsel or find out the solution, how can they can get help, lawyer or the organization. But the workplace harassment is more isolated people. They don't want to talk. I know the people who harassed by their customer in the salon, who harassed by their customer in the restaurant, bosses harassment, sexual assault, they don't want to talk. First something came their mind, my family life will be broken, husband will give me divorce. It's a community shame, I'm going to lose my job. It's like a social, some kind of shame feeling. So they are more isolated. It's like a taking really time to fix those type of issues. Even when I go to do my outreach, I talk with the worker bosses actually surveillance me. Until I stay like 1 hour even in the restaurant eating food, they always surveillance me. They don't want I talk with the worker because they know what type of work drum do. So this is some kind of like domestic violence more easier for me to do the workplace like justice. So this is something really like feel me helpless. Whatever the successful I am now, like a member to organizing director or whatever like people give me credit, oh Kazi, you are great, but I feel really not great when I saw in front of me my member suffer a lot in the workplace and they are not ready to talk because of the patriarchy society. Give them the idea what they are internalized some kind of thinking, put them like a suffering harassed but not to speak up, not do their own justice. there's something I really want to fix and learn more. How can I fix people not actually do their internalized isolating or suffering more about this harassment and like a really gender violence in their workplace?
I want to say first thank you to Molly and everyone at the Solidarity Center for both hosting this panel and also including me in it. It's a real honor to be here and speak on such an important issue. So my name is Julia Rybak. I'm the Director of Organizing for the Hotel Trades Council. We have about 34,000 members represented at over 300 shops. We represent workers in the hotel, food and beverage, and gaming industry, primarily in New York City, but also in the entire state of New York, as well as northern New Jersey. The work that our members do ranges from room attendants to electricians to cocktail servers to front desk agents. Basically anything you can find in the hotel, any of the work, our members do that work. About 45% of our membership are women, and our members speak 74 different primary languages. So, especially here in New York City, many immigrant members from all over the world as well as across the entire country. We've always been a united and militant union and work very hard to engage and continue to train and develop our membership. I'll get back to that a little bit more later. Given today's topic, there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention that are particular to the work that both our members and also thousands of non-union workers in this industry do, that I think raise the threat level. One, our members do work oftentimes on floors alone, entering guest rooms where there may or may not be a guest. Many of our members work at businesses that try to increase their business based on sex. Oftentimes women have to wear suggestive or even demeaning uniforms in this line of work. Many of these workers do tipped work, or worked in a tipped classification, which, as I'm sure this study talks about, increases the rates of sexual harassment and assaults greatly. And I would also just say that for a lot of the work that we do, both as immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, it's supposed to be invisible work. And you know, as you said, Molly, in the beginning, work that may prey on certain people, and I would say especially in the non-unionized industry, you can see that with certain employers that have a habit of hiring particularly vulnerable populations, and guests often know that. Our perspective is obviously that workers should be treated fairly, protected from violence, and protected from false accusations, and when it comes to our members, we're able to largely shift the playing field on that. So what we do as a union is largely through, I brought a copy of our contract, our collective bargaining agreement, or our contract, which is a legally binding document that obviously greatly improves the legal rights that our members have. Our contract provides for exceptional grievance and arbitration language. There are no time limits in our grievance and arbitration language. There are no steps you have to go through. It provides for us to have a right to information. We're allowed access to the premise. We're allowed to demand meetings with members. We're allowed to file for arbitrations the same day in cases of emergency. We have very strong health and safety language that require for safe devices. The contract's intentionally vague in this regard so that we can raise issues we may not yet have thought of. Our contract now has language in it since 2012 for panic buttons. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Our contract has incredible job security provisions. And I would also just say the expediency to which issues our ability to respond to issues, rather, is also incredibly fast. I just wanted to mention some of that because I think the most important thing that being a part of a powerful union creates in this topic and with gender-based violence is it creates an environment where women can raise complaints. And within our union, an environment where both people can raise complaints, but they can also be immediately dealt with. You don't have to fear retaliation for termination. Because of seniority rights, you don't have to fear retaliation for maybe your schedule will get cut or your section will get changed. If you're a waiter and you're serving normally a section of large tables with big parties, the gratuities you can make from that versus serving little two-tops, that greatly impacts your income. And because of seniority provisions that protect from favoritism, when you raise a complaint, you don't have to fear retaliation in the section you're assigned to work in. I wanted to go over a couple of examples. Years ago, there was a very famous chef working in one of our hotels, in the restaurant of one of our hotels. One of the kind of fanciest, hardest to get into restaurants in Manhattan. And 3 hostesses were raising complaints against the maitre d' of this restaurant, who was a very good friend of this famous celebrity chef. The 3 hostesses went to HR to raise complaints of sexual harassment. And after about a week, when nothing happened, they came to the union. When they returned to work, the union had called over to management and requested information to start an investigation on this. And one of the hostesses was pulled into the chef's office and was berated for raising this complaint to the union, and then terminated. So a number of union representatives went over to the hotel and had what we like to call a lobby meeting. It's against the contract to have a work stoppage, so sometimes we have to find a space large enough to meet with a few hundred employees at the same time, and in hotels with banquet spaces, it's impossible to find such a large space, so the only place that's big enough to meet with all of our members over such an important issue is the lobby where guests are checking in. Needless to say, the hostess was hired back to work. Her and the other 2 ladies that had come to the union to raise the complaint were given the increased protections contractually, the increased protections that are reserved for our delegates who do the work of enforcing the contract for the entire length of their employment at the hotel. Furthermore, the chef was made to read an apology to all shifts and all of the employees of the hotel, which I'm going to read real quick. It says, "I wish to apologize to the employees of said hotel. I want to underline that apology to the 3 hostesses who exercised their rights under the union contract and the law to file a complaint of sexual harassment against the maitre d'. My firing of one of these hostesses for bringing this grievance forward was wrong, and I admit I handled this grievance improperly and used poor management judgment. I sincerely hope that they will accept my apology. I also apologize to the union and its officers and to all of the employees of the hotel. I sincerely regret my behavior. I solemnly promise never again to behave in anything but a courteous and respectful manner toward all of the hotel's employees. I also solemnly promise never again to violate any of the legal or contractual rights of any St. Regis employee." Oh, there I said the hotel. So, like I said, I think not only are there the rights of seniority rights that protect against retaliation and favoritism, but job security, which creates an environment in which people feel comfortable raising these complaints, but we then have the power to make management correct that environment, correct that context, to make other women feel safe raising these complaints. Some people may be familiar with the DSK case that took place a few years back, where a room attendant was allegedly forced to perform sexual acts, and it became, you know, an international precedent. In reaction to that, and I think, Molly, something you said when you introduced this, workers having the resources and the community of support is something most women, most workers don't have. You know, as anyone that followed that case saw, that woman, after raising this complaint and after hiring a lawyer, was absolutely destroyed in the press, as often is the case with too many women who speak up about what happened to them. And not only does a powerful union have the ability to create the context for complaints to be raised, create systemic solutions like panic buttons. All room attendants or room service waiters, anyone that goes to the floor on their own is now required to be given a panic button that they can press, where security is alerted that there is a problem and to go to that location. We were also able at that particular hotel to change the uniforms after this incident, so the women are now able to wear pants instead of shorter skirts. And the last incident I want to mention actually happened last Friday morning. Around 5:15 in the morning, a man crawled over the front desk of one of the hotels where we represent workers and went behind the curtain where the telephone operator was working with his pants unzipped. She got a hold of management. They called the police and they had him removed from the premise. It's impossible to know what they would have done if this was a non-union hotel, but you know, they did the right thing. That being said, when she notified us as we arrived into the office that morning, I sent the business agent over with a team of organizers, and the woman who had endured this event, we got her and all of the delegates, or all of the union reps that work on the shop floor at this hotel, and went to speak with the general manager. Not only did we get her paid for that day, sent home in a cab paid for by her hotel. We got her paid for that day and the following 2 days. But additionally, we made the hotel bring on an additional security guard on the overnight shift. And now the front desk agents and operators have panic buttons, which is not something that contractually the hotel is required to do. Because of our power over the industry, and because we have a certain right within our contract, we're able to easily extend that right to other people that need it. In comparison, I have seen non-union workers, a massage therapist, for instance, at a 5-star spa at a hotel here in the city that was non-union, have a client repeatedly expose himself, touch himself, step out of the room to get a supervisor, who then told her, oh, go back in there and continue the treatment, and I'll knock on the door and say, is everything okay here? So it's a non-union comparison to how management deals with these kinds of things. I have another example of a waitress who, in trying to get her vacation pay from the restaurant she worked for, the paymaster told her that he would give her her pay only if she went on a date with him. The next time she asked for her check, only if she gave him a kiss. And she got a lawyer through the Division of Human Rights, and 5 years later her case was settled. And so I raised that not by any means to fault the Division of Human Rights. I am sure that they are an overburdened, underfunded agency, but just to paint the picture of what a powerful union can do in response on Friday morning versus the years that it takes to both investigate and reach a settlement with a company. So I I guess I would also just like to say on a personal note, the first time that I was sexually harassed at work, I was 14. And I never would have raised it to my supervisor's boss. I wanted to keep my job. I knew that if I wanted to go to college someday, the only way that was going to happen is if I continued to work as a cashier in this fast food restaurant. And so I know from personal experience, I'm sure many people here do, that this is something I think probably far more women than are reported endure and experience on a far too regular basis. And I just wanted to say again what an honor it is to be a part of this discussion and to also talk about contractually what are these extra legal rights that we're able to give for people, and what is the environment that you can create when workers and when women have power and are able to use that power for themselves, to protect themselves, and to demand an end to this kind of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I think that's a very powerful but also very distressing reminder, because as we heard from Rob at the beginning, in some sectors the reported levels of prevalence are over 50%, for example in agriculture or in restaurants. And we also all know, both from personal and from professional experience, that it is always more than what's reported. A couple other things I think that Julia mentioned are going to be very relevant to the next presentation from Ernestina Ochoa. Women in particular, but workers working alone, working directly with clients who are outside their workplace, is something that domestic workers confront all of the time. And unlike hotel workers, who, there's some great and sort of powerful examples that make you smile, the idea of a whole hotel staff coming together in a lobby to stand up for a coworker and demand an apology, is a very different situation than a person working alone in a private home. And so there again, we hear why organizing, why creating this network of peers and this strong organization is so important for isolated workers.
Bueno, yo lo que les voy a hablar es sobre la violencia en el trabajo. La violencia en el trabajo que pasamos las trabajadoras del hogar exclusivamente pasa en nuestros trabajos. Cada una trabajamos en diferentes casas.
So I'm going to speak with you about violence in the workplace, specifically how that shows up for domestic workers who work in private homes.
Y entre el empleador y la empleadora y la trabajadora, que somos nosotras, ¿no?, ejercen una relación de poder sobre nosotras, porque nosotras somos muy vulnerables, somos nosotras, ya que estamos solas en el trabajo. Venimos nosotras de diferentes provincias a la capital en busca de trabajo y nos encontramos sin familia.
So with our employers, there's a very strong power dynamic in the relationship. We are vulnerable because we are working alone in the workplace. Many of us come from provincial or rural areas, and we are also separated, therefore, from our families.
Como lo dice una cantante, la violencia es un monstruo grande y pisa fuerte. A nosotros nos pisa muy fuerte, nos pisa la violencia en el trabajo. Somos violentadas psicológicamente, físicamente, somos intimidadas en el trabajo, somos acosadas también, somos maltratadas. Y muchas veces se ha querido cometer hasta homicidio, y en algunos casos hasta han matado a las trabajadoras del hogar.
There's a singer who says, and help me out here, that violence is a big monster that bites, stomps with a heavy foot, thanks. As domestic workers, we face all kinds of abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. We face intimidation, harassment, and there have even been cases of homicide.
Por toda la intimidación que pasamos en el trabajo, muchas veces nosotros tenemos que callar los atropellos que nos hacen, la violencia que se comete con nosotros por el temor a ser despedidas y en algunos casos deportadas, ya que muchas de nosotras somos trabajadoras migrantes.
We face a lot of intimidation on the job and intimidation to keep us silent. And there's a lot of fear based on intimidation of being fired and being deported, as a large number of domestic workers are migrant workers.
Por ejemplo, nosotros tenemos casos, y ustedes lo pueden ver en el internet. En Perú mataron a 2 hermanitas mientras los empleadores estaban tomando licor, estaban festejando en el patio junto a la piscina, pues abusaron de estas 2 trabajadoras, una de 15 años y la otra de 17 años, y las ahogaron en la piscina. Entonces se les encontró muertas en la piscina y las autoridades no hicieron nada, estuvieron a favor de los empleadores. Las mató su empleador. Su empleador con sus amigos estaban celebrando una fiesta. Entonces, como estaban borrachos, ellos las violaron y las mataron. Y también el otro caso es de la otra trabajadora del hogar también, que la metieron en una poza. O sea, esos son casos verídicos que salieron en la televisión. Así como estos casos, ¿no? Hay muchos casos de las trabajadoras del hogar.
So there are a couple of really extreme cases that you may have seen on the internet. There was a case of 2 sisters who worked as domestic workers for a family who had a big party, and they were the domestic workers were 15 and 17 years old, and they were raped and drowned and killed at the party, and the authorities didn't do anything. They sided with the employers. Another case where a domestic worker was put in a well and killed.
Muchos empleadores que tienen muchas discusiones también con sus esposas, ellos toda su cólera y toda su ira la vuelcan hacia nosotras, hacia las trabajadoras del hogar, que somos golpeadas brutalmente.
We also see that employers who fight a lot with and are aggressive with their wives are also aggressive with the domestic workers, and we see domestic workers being beaten in homes where there is domestic violence.
Por ejemplo, yo fui abusada sexualmente, tenía 12 años y no tenía nadie a mi lado. Entonces yo no podía llamar a mis padres, porque no tengo padre, y tampoco podía ir a una comisaría o decirle a alguna autoridad, porque nosotras las trabajadoras del hogar somos muy vulnerables. Entonces, por eso que se cometen tantos abusos con nosotros. Pero yo lloro, pero no lloro de impotencia, sino yo lloro porque después de lo que me pasó, a mí me dio mucha fuerza para yo salir adelante, para organizarme, para fundar mi sindicato, para lograr que las autoridades nos escuchen, y hoy en día en Perú tenemos una ley para las trabajadoras del hogar, y también nosotras en otros países hemos logrado también que tengan leyes las trabajadoras del hogar para que las protejan, y un convenio, el convenio 189, por lo cual venimos luchando nosotros, porque ese convenio nos da protecciones, nos da una norma internacional para que nos proteja, no tanto a las trabajadoras del hogar nacionales, sino también a nivel internacional, a nuestras hermanas migrantes, ¿no? Entonces, Nosotros eso es lo que venimos haciendo en la Federación Internacional, ¿no? Nos hemos organizado, porque solamente organizadas y estando en sindicatos, nosotras podemos salir de esto que yo salí, ¿no? De la violencia a la lucha, a las calles, a proteger al resto de nuestras compañeras.
I can't remember if I translated that. When Ernestina was when she was crying, and she was saying, I was sexually abused when I was 12 years old. And I didn't have anyone to go to. I couldn't call my parents because I don't have parents. I couldn't go to the authorities because we're vulnerable and not believed. There's just so much abuse, but I cry not because of a feeling of helplessness, but because after what I went through, I became so strong and so committed to organizing, to building my union, so that authorities will listen to us. Today in Peru, we've been able to win a domestic worker law, and we've been able to do that in other countries as well, and we've actually been able to get an international convention at the International Labor Organization, Convention 189, that we fought for, that creates international standards for domestic work, and that includes migrant domestic workers and that protections. So that's what we're doing as the International Domestic Worker Federation, is organizing. Only by organizing and having unions can we get out of situations like I faced when I was 12 and can we protect other domestic workers.
Y para finalizar, le decimos que estamos una delegación de nuestra federación en este evento, porque queremos nosotros pedirle a todas las mujeres que están en este evento, ¿no?, que nosotras lo que queremos es que haya un convenio en la OIT sobre la violencia de género de la mujer. Eso es lo que buscamos, eso es lo que queremos y eso es lo que pedimos a todos ustedes, su apoyo.
So to close, we are a delegation here from the International Domestic Workers Federation because we want to come here to ask all the women who are part of the CSW to work very hard for the ILO Convention on Gender-Based Violence at Work. We've seen the power of having a convention, and we should all work towards winning this convention in the years to come.
Mujeres ejercen su poder en el sindicato.
Women, use your power through the unions.
So we have half an hour for questions. I have a list of one, but I know we've all talked up here our fair share. So I'd like to first, once again, thank all our panelists for bringing such really powerful and also specific knowledge, information, and experiences to share with you all. So let's give them all a round of applause. To sum up some of the things that we've heard, I'm not going to attempt to even summarize everybody's experience, but I think a lot of the questions about specific risks in different sectors, about different vulnerabilities, and about the way different kinds of organizations, some working with documented and undocumented workers, some with a formal workplace presence, some with very disparate workforces, are all using the power of organizing and collective action to ensure that when a woman worker in particular is a victim of violence, that she's not confronting it on her own. A bunch of different questions that came out. I'm not going to ask our panelists to respond to one or the other, they can decide, but I did want to highlight something that I noticed in listening to all of our panelists. We've heard both from the study that Robin wrote, from the comments just now, that sexual harassment and gender-based violence is incredibly underreported. And you heard from a panel of 5 people, at least 3 say, this happened to me when I was 12, when I was 14. It gives you a sense of just a random sample of how prevalent it is. And one of the things that's interesting to me is hearing for example, Ernestina talking about the terror of being a 12-year-old in that position to becoming a powerful union leader now who's organizing other women. We heard Julia mention the same thing. Being a 14-year-old and not feeling that you had any choice, or being a undocumented worker in New York, as Kazi mentioned. Everybody, obviously these are tremendous personal stories of what I've come through, what I've learned, how I'm organizing, but I think it speaks to the sort of larger power of transformative organizations, and I'd like to ask our panelists to think about that. You've come through a tremendous amount of change personally, but you've also seen your organizations change. They've negotiated new protections. They've started dealing with workers on an equal basis regardless of their migration status. They've gotten conventions at the ILO that recognize them as workers with rights. So I'm wondering, what changes do you think your organizations still need to make? What is the next steps in evolutions? And looking at your own history, what would you suggest that they make? And certainly, I want to leave it open to you to respond to anything, but I'm very struck by these personal stories of growth and the potential that we all have as organizers and organizations to keep building. Kazi, it looks like you'd like to start. Please.
So I just first appreciate panelists who actually share their personal experiences. I actually forgot to mention my personal experiences because that one categorized the gender-based violation. I was married actually when I was 13. I became a mother when I was 15. I mean, I get a baby when I'm supposed to play with something, doll or something. So, but it's really, my life experience is nothing actually obstacle or barrier hold me the place. I overcome. I overcome because of the support of other women. I become a good organizer or success organizer because other drum women's members support me a lot. So this is something I'm looking for when we talk, lot of issues we cannot talk even, is not covered. Solidarity Center work with Bangladeshi garments worker, where actually we always talk about retail worker, $33 wages for full month, like American retailer violating their worker rights. We never talk actually workplace harassment. They also harassed by supervisor, they also harassed by union leader. I know a lot of history, but never I heard that kind of conversation I always face. Recent time I visit Italy and I meet amazing organizing group in Trieste where they're working with the sex worker who actually trafficking victim from Nigeria and South America, where they are like a badly beating inhuman when they are all money actually taking away the media persons and they have even no food. They become in the street and police harassment. So it's a lot of stuff we have never chance to talk international space. We are lucky enough, our some kind of rights we are talking because a lot of other workers still undermine, still international space, UN or ILO space never talk. We need to actually build the solidarity with all those areas which one undermine. Recent time is an amazing example of how can we build actually international solidarity. If you see when Trump came in the power, women realized they will be more targeted by this government. The women march, DC march, more than 150 city march together. Women in Italy, women in even Antarctica, where women not marching for American women's rights. So this is something really unique, really amazing. Show us how can we support each other, how can we support each other, whatever we are, doesn't matter, but we can support each other. We need to hear more story, more rights, the space, and I'm not the person actually go to ILO, and even I'm not the person to go even more United Nations. I can barely come the Carol's organization space, sometimes side event to talk our issues. So, but I'm requesting the people who came here from all over the country to push the administration, United Nations to change this policy, which policy can work for the, the worker in the Gulf countries where domestic worker badly harassed, beaten, raped, sexually assaulted, but their government don't want to take any action against those countries. I met recent time when I go to Saudi Arabia, even the Masjid Haram and Masjid Nabi's women's worker who badly, the badly administration or the contractor violating their rights, putting them in the camp. They have even no food, but nobody even want to talk because Saudi Arabia have no a union or something. So we have to think about all those workers whose voice is not here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, you're talking about how movements change. I just want to say that what this report highlights, and I think what we've heard today, and what I really think a lot about as someone who's worked on these issues, and all of us have for many years, is in the States we have had laws in the books that prohibit the behaviors that we're talking about today for many, many, many years. And yet we still have a high percentage of women in the United States who do not know or recognize that what's happening to them is illegal and that they have rights. And then we have the next problem, which is if they do know, they are too afraid to come forward because their life experience teaches them that no one will believe them and that no one will help them, or if they won't get a lawyer, and even if they do, they may not prevail. And so what is so important is the work that my sisters are describing here and that you all are doing. It is the collective action that is essential. Only together can those laws work for all of us. I say that as a lawyer. And I apologize, I have to run and catch a train, but thank you.
I would like to end by saying, I think the absolute most important thing is that we organize for power, and in my opinion, organize for union contracts. As Robin just said, I think we have a lot of laws on the books in this country that are supposed to protect us, but don't, because in terms of the retaliation you can face when you raise complaints under those laws, there isn't somebody to back you up. When a law is broken and you have a lawyer, the lawyer looks at fixing that one part of what is broken. And I think under strong union contracts, you're able to fix a larger, more holistic, it's kind of the wrong way to put it, but problem. And I think we need to continue to have real legal and structural solutions to the problems we face that permanently shift the power that we have. I think one of the reasons why strong union contracts are successful is the immediate threat of this is my livelihood, this is how I support my children, this is how I keep a roof over my head. That fear of losing my job or losing portions of my income is taken away, and it makes it easier to raise complaints. And to answer your question about what can we do better, I think we do a pretty good job of dealing with the complaints that are brought to our attention. And even though we have the best contract in the world for the people that do this work, I always find a number of members, because most of the world, we are powerless, and most of the world is a non-union world, that people don't realize the power they have under our contract. Some people do, too many don't. And it's something we try to be good at in terms of educating people and teaching them how to exercise the power the contract gives them. But it's something we can never stop doing, because most of the rest of the world, people don't have this kind of power. And so that's something that we can do better, is not in response to the complaints we get, but helping people realize they can make more complaints and we can have more fights and more victories.
Poniendo el tiempo. Sí, solo bueno, lo que voy a decir es de que nosotros, la Federación Internacional, ¿no?, seguimos organizándonos, seguimos formando sindicatos, ayudando a aquellos países que aún las trabajadoras del hogar no se han organizado. Estamos formando alianzas con otros sindicatos, tenemos alianzas con la CSI, tenemos alianzas también con Solidaridad, ¿no? Porque creemos nosotros cosas que solamente estando aliados, ¿no? Nosotros vamos a salir adelante, ¿no? Porque solitas no podemos, ¿no? Entonces, somos 45.000 miembros, tenemos en la federación, todavía pensamos que somos muy poquitas, ¿no? Porque somos 100 millones de trabajadoras del hogar a nivel mundial, entonces queremos llegar a más trabajadoras del hogar y estamos haciendo nosotras también estamos haciendo una campaña, estamos haciendo investigaciones, ¿no? Y también tendremos capacitación, información para las lideresas trabajadoras del hogar para que a la vez estas sean formadoras de otras trabajadoras del hogar.
So we, the International Domestic Workers Federation, keep organizing. We are building unions, including in countries where domestic workers don't already have them. And we're forming alliances with labor, with ITUC, with the Solidarity Center, because only through alliances can we win. We can't win alone. We have 500,000 domestic workers in our federation, but that's still very little. It's still very small when there are 100 million domestic workers around the world.
So once again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our volunteer interpreters.